All right. Well, good afternoon. My name is Stephen Ezel. I'm the Vice President of Global Innovation Policy here at the Information Technology and Innovation Foundation. And we're delighted that you've decided to join us for this event on fostering the industrial internet to accelerate economic growth and transformation. As ITIF has written in reports such as A Policymaker's Guide to Smart Manufacturing and How Cloud Computing Enables Modern Manufacturing, each of which are available to you at the back of the room. Manufacturing is really in the process of being revolutionized by the advent of a number of transformative information and communications technologies, such as additive manufacturing or 3D printing, cloud computing, the Internet of Things, 5G wireless broadband communications, big data, artificial intelligence, and advanced sensing and robotics. Collectively, all this has come together in what's been coined, quote, the industrial internet, which refers to the integration and linkage of big data, analytical tools, and wireless networks with physical and industrial equipment. In short, these technologies are transforming every facet of the modern industrial enterprise. They're transforming how products are designed, fabricated, sold, used and consumed aftermarket in the marketplace. They're changing how industrial enterprises have to think about the skill sets of the workforce, and they're changing the basis of global competition across manufacturing industries, including by compelling companies to introduce really interesting new business models that focus on device as a service and how you can monetize downstream products like jet engines or locomotives through the ability to extract actionable real-time insight from data. Our friends in Finland, Tekes, which is their national agency for science and technology, wrote a report over the summer estimating that fully 50% of all value created in the global economy over the next 10 years will be created digitally from the real-time extraction of value from information. And I think if you look at a company like GE, consider their concept of what they call the digital twin, which refers to creating software representations of machines such as jet engines, gas turbines, power plants, or pieces of physical equipment. And so what this means is, of course, there's a pro forma virtual software model of, say, a jet engine that resides in GE servers, right? But they keep a digital replica, a digital copy of every single jet engine or locomotive or fan blade or turbine that exists out in the world. And as they're able to maintain and track information from the real-time usage of these products in one central place, they can know, for example, is there a minute crack in a fan blade? And as I understand from your colleagues at GE Aviation, this allows them to build aftermarket service contracts for maintenance and repair of jet engines that are precisely tailored to the unique characteristics of that engine. So they can track through the entire service life, what temperature did that aircraft fly through, what moisture, what humidity. Met one of your colleagues in San Francisco. He said, Steve, our ultimate goal is to be able to track how many grains of sand have actually flown through an engine over time. And again, what this gives them the ability to do is to effectively price service contracts differently for Emirates or Southwest or United, because they know in full detail the operational history of that entire fleet of jet aircraft. And of course, with the data we collect, we can make better engines and increase uptime and make sure we all keep flying. So it's just one, I thought, really compelling example of what the emergence of these digital technologies are going to allow us to do. And then when you broaden that out across the entire global manufacturing economy, the effects are going to be truly profound. Some estimate that the industrial internet could add as much as $10 trillion to global GDP over the next 20 years. A report by the McKinsey Global Institute estimates that the productivity of the world's factories may increase by as much as 25% by the year 2025. So these technologies are really going to fundamentally change the landscape of global competition, because they're going to enable more manufacturing in traditionally higher cost locations. They're going to facilitate mass customization. They're going to increase the ability to have efficient production in smaller lot sizes, and this is going to enable more local manufacturing across the global economy. So in short, the digitalization of manufacturing does herald a tremendous future. But while industry and enterprise are going to lead this transformation, if we don't get the policy environment right, then neither will customers, whether in B2B or B2C markets, fully be able to enjoy the benefits of these technologies, nor will companies, industries, and enterprises be able to effectively compete in the global economy if they exist in a domestic policy environment that's not supportive of advanced manufacturing. So countries need to implement supportive policies around a host of issues, whether it's workforce skills, data flows, tax policy, cybersecurity, etc. And as always, ITIF has assembled an all-star panel to discuss these issues this afternoon. So let me now introduce our panelists and turn the floor over to them. And I should say to the folks in the back, we have some more seats up front if you'd like to come and take a seat. But first this morning, we will be hearing from Mr. Alex Dmitriev, who has served as Senior Vice President and General Counsel of GE since November 2015. He oversees a global team of professionals responsible for GE's legal matters, compliance, governmental affairs, and environmental health and safety in the over 180 countries around the world in which GE does business. Alex serves also on GE's Corporate Executive Council and chairs GE's Policy Compliance Review Board. He holds a BA in economics and political science from Yale and a law degree from Harvard. After we hear from Alex, we'll turn to Rebecca Taylor. Rebecca is the Senior Vice President of the National Center for Manufacturing Sciences, the largest technology consortium in North America focused on manufacturing, where she's really helping to chart the frontier in secure, productive, and innovative manufacturing systems. Rebecca serves on the board for the Society of Manufacturing Engineers, the National Advanced Mobility Consortium, and Girls Inc. DC. Rebecca is a GW graduate and holds her master's degree in economics from the London School of Economics. Last but not least, we'll hear from Andrew Bikos, who is the American Society of Mechanical Engineers, ASME Legislative Fellow, now in the office of Congressman Tom Reed of New York's 23rd District, who chairs the House Manufacturing Caucus, where he is responsible for manufacturing, workforce development, science, energy, and environment portfolios. And he's actually on leave from Boeing, where he previously served as director of the Performance Technology Strategy Unit within Boeing's Research and Technology team. Andy is a holder of several patents and publisher of over 24 scientific publications, and he holds an MBA from UCLA and a PhD in aeronautics and astronautics from Stanford. So it's a great team. Alex, I'm going to turn it to you. We will hear from the panelists, then have about a moderated discussion session of 10 to 15 minutes, and then we'll open the floor to your questions. Thank you very much.
Hey, thanks, Stephen. I'd like to thank ITIF for pulling us all together to discuss such an important topic. I suppose the fact that even the General Counsel is excited about this shows you how widespread the phenomenon's become within GE, if the enthusiasm even gets to me after you heard my job description. And I think it's really a sign of what we see and the potential, enormous potential we see at GE for the world if we get this right. And that is not an easy task or a small proposition. So, you know, in terms of how we got here, this is as new as it is exciting. Back in 2011, researchers at our facilities in Niskayuna had become convinced that core internet technologies such as ubiquitous connectivity, cloud storage, and data analytics, which is a growing science unto itself, could have an impact on business that is more profound than the impact that the internet has already had on consumers. And, you know, in our view, the industrial Internet of Things could make what's happened on the internet and what's happened on the internet until now look like chump change. To be honest, when you look at the potential of what the industrial sector could do. So we took a pretty bold step, and my boss, Jeff Immelt, made a bet on our future on transforming GE. We have invested billions of dollars in trying to transform ourselves into the digital industrial in the world. You know, what does that mean? It means using our digital capabilities and using our scale and the diversity of our businesses to help drive outcomes for our customers. We opened GE Digital in San Ramon, California. We hired great talent. GE software engineers have created a industry-tailored platform known as Predix, and we've built what we think are killer apps in asset performance management and servicing fleets to help our customers, really to partner with our customers, to help them utilize the power and insights of the industrial Internet of Things to make themselves better companies. And I think that, Steve talked a little bit about digital twins, and when you start thinking about the enormous possibilities that are out there for an airline to make decisions about the maintenance of its jet engines based on what's happened to this particular jet engine and what it's been doing, as opposed to the law of averages and what an average engine would require in terms of maintenance, you can see the endless possibilities there to optimize the fleet. Imagine a world where the plane that you're flying on has engines that are talking to the industrial internet and letting the airport know that it's going to need a particular type of part when the plane's getting turned around when it lands at Denver Airport. Imagine how much that improves your life, and because it improves your life, it improves our customers' lives. I mean, that's a small example of the types of things that I think all of us thought were unthinkable as recently as 10 years ago that I think are now going to be taken as a given and a requirement for the kinds of sophisticated customers we have. So all of this, if we partner with our customers right, allows us to decrease unscheduled maintenance, operate factories more efficiently, improve health and safety, improve performance, lower greenhouse gas emissions, and basically improve manufacturing quality and efficiency. What's wrong with any of that? I mean, how can anybody vote against that? So, it's an exciting proposition. And I think that the benefits of the industrial internet really aren't lost on anyone anymore. GE's not the only company that's in this space. Our competitors, worthy competitors, are also getting into this space in a big way. And some of the studies, and Steve quoted some of the statistics, but believe that the industrial internet's going to add trillions of dollars of value to global GDP over the next 15 years and create a whole slew of business sectors that we don't even know about yet. So that's how exciting it is, and I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that the industrial Internet of Things is going to be the fourth industrial revolution. So as a result, governments are starting to get involved. And that can be good and that can be bad. And government has a role, obviously, to play in something that's important to the public. And so what we're seeing now are the governments around the world, from the United States to Germany and China and Australia, are all looking at ways to harness the benefits of the industrial internet and its emerging applications for the benefit of citizens in those countries. But government isn't always perfect, and in efforts, well-intentioned, to promote their own national champion companies, governments risk taking steps that could squelch the benefits of the industrial internet before it even gets going. And again, well-intentioned, but steps that people take with an idea of having the industrial internet become a force for global good can actually be self-defeating if they aren't done in the right way. For example, when it comes to industrial internet interoperability, governments are tempted to wade in prematurely and set standards in an area where we believe that private sector-led standards and voluntary industry standards by people who understand the industrial internet the best and the most would be the right way to go, with backstopping from a government rather than with leadership from a government. And country-specific standards and country-specific platforms that erect artificial barriers at a country's borders threaten to squelch the benefits of the industrial internet and global connectivity again before it even gets started. So governments and policymakers, and we don't question that they're completely well-intentioned in this area, really need to be thoughtful about how they approach this and work in partnership with the companies that want to use the industrial internet. And there's certainly a proper role for government in this area and for policymakers in this area. And we at GE would put it in 6 buckets and encourage focusing on 6 principles. And the first is standards. So the industrial internet is an infant, relatively speaking, compared to everything else going on with the internet. It's young, it's 6 years old, and it's marked by innovation and private sector-led efforts right now to ensure interoperability. And in our view, promoting open, voluntary, industry-led standards by responsible companies is the best way for governments to ensure that innovation continues at a maximum speed with standards that are globally compatible. Companies like GE want to be able to use the industrial internet in a way that works across 180 borders. and we're uniquely positioned to provide insights on issues like that, as are many of our competitors. The second is privacy, and this is really an area that I'd probably put up a red flag on more than any of the others, because privacy for the consumer internet is a completely different proposition than privacy for the industrial internet. Data generated by industrial equipment, with some exceptions for healthcare equipment, rarely includes anything that can be reasonably construed as personal data or personally identifiable information. So industrial internet applications like the ones that we're working on typically don't target consumers and don't collect information about consumers. We aren't Equifax. Raw sensor data from a diesel-electric locomotive, for example, doesn't really have personally identifiable information. So government shouldn't take privacy regulation that they designed for the consumer internet and just apply it willy-nilly over to the industrial internet. And yet we see signs of this beginning to emerge in certain parts of the world that concern us very much. The third area where government should focus is cybersecurity, and that's obviously a legitimate and overriding concern that government has every legitimate interest in overseeing and regulating. And cloud computing brings with it a lot of cybersecurity benefits, and quite honestly is typically more secure than on-premises storage of data. So cybersecurity regulation ought to be technology neutral with respect to where data is processed and stored, and not discriminate against the cloud, which is actually probably one of the safest places for GE, for example, to store its data, which is an enormous mindset shift for us at GE. So again, voluntary, private sector-led performance and risk-based cybersecurity standards, such as the NIST framework, are probably, in our view, the most effective standard toward promoting cybersecurity. Fourth bucket is freedom of contract, and again, this goes to the difference between the industrial internet and the consumer internet. Industrial internet applications like the ones that we're developing and the ones that our partners are developing and the ones that our customers are developing are really business to business or business to government, with very sophisticated parties on both sides of the contract. So that makes contracts negotiated by sophisticated counterparties who understand their issues better than anyone else and understand the economics of these issues better than anyone else and understand the inherent uncertainties of the industrial internet better than anyone else. The parties who are best positioned to use contracts to address issues such as liability, rights to data, customer entitlement to updates, and intellectual property, and they offer more flexibility than legislation as we continue to innovate, because contracts can be amended, contracts can be updated at the push of a button, which is much different than regulations. Government policy in this area should respect the enforceability of contracts, the rights of parties to address, sophisticated parties to address these issues intelligently, and promote the freedom of contract. Fifth area is data flows, and I talked about this already, but the point of the industrial internet is to amass large quantities of data, aggregate them from multiple devices to yield the best insights from a company like GE that is designed and manufactured the engines. And the more data we get, the more we benefit all of our customers, all of the users of the industrial internet, and society. Some governments, again, are erecting these borders, artificial borders at their geographic borders that require the data be physically stored within their jurisdiction and limit the types of data that can exit the country, and also limit, in some cases, the types of data that can enter the country. You can imagine our view is that this is entirely opposite to the very spirit of the industrial internet. The idea is for this to be a global phenomenon to connect devices around the world, such as locomotives, jet engines, that by definition have maximum value when they freely cross borders. Why wouldn't the data that those machines generate just as freely cross borders along with those devices? So again, government should, in our view, when it comes to the type of data that's generated by the machines that we design and manufacture, adopt policies that encourage cross-border data flows for the benefit of everybody who's using that data. And restricting the transfer of data across borders, no matter how well-intentioned it might be, will actually disserve citizens of those countries by depriving them from the full benefit of the industrial internet. And then the last principle is workforce development, and I think this is a huge issue in the United States as well as everyone else, but the industrial internet's here to stay. And there's a whole new set of skills that are required and a whole new field of opportunities that have become available that have augmented traditional industries with a whole different era of smart machines and connected machines. It requires a whole new approach to leverage digital industrial innovations. So we ought to really be looking at how to train people and retrain people to harness the full benefit of the digital industrial revolution, which includes serious labor market reforms and redesigned social safety nets and teaching the right kinds of skills in the right kinds of schools to the right kinds of people. And again, this is a challenge that I think GE relishes an opportunity to help governments address. So I think when you look at those 6 areas, it's easy for me to sit here and throw up warning flags about what governments might do if they don't do this in the right way. But it's hard not to remember to weigh those potential caution signs against the excitement that this ought to be generating for everybody who's in the room. This is extraordinary stuff. This is stuff that, quite honestly, I remember in the Jetson cartoons. I might be dating myself a little bit, but those of you who are my age will remember George Jetson flying around, and I see the industrial internet and I say, oh my God, it's finally happening. And I look at the connectivity. I couldn't be more excited about the ways in which GE is ready to help change lives for the better around the world through the power of the industrial internet. We're ready to work with governments in a cooperative partnership to make sure that responsible companies work with regulators to get this the right way to maximize the benefit of free-flowing data around the world. So thanks to the time, Steve, and I look forward to discussing this with Rebecca and Andrew too.
Great. Thank you so much, Alex. And I should mention that my colleague Nigel Corey has written a wonderful report called Cross-Border Data Flows, what are the barriers and what do they cost, which documents at least 34 countries around the world and counting that have put in place a number of these types of barriers to global data flows. And this is certainly one of the most significant policy issues we need to address. Rebecca.
Hi, thank you, Stephen and Alex, for those setting the stage for us, and to everyone for coming here to learn more about the IIoT. But let me just start, for those of you that don't know, the National Center for Manufacturing Sciences. We are a 30-year-old technology development consortium. So we have manufacturing companies as members and technology companies. GE is one of our members since the very beginning. And the companies come together to address technology challenges that they're all facing. And they realize that through collaboration, they can usually get to a solution with less time, less risk, and less cost. So, of course, the Industrial Internet of Things is something that's important to us and to all of our members. And both Alex and Stephen were talking about the economic impact of this industrial internet. But let's just go to a different data point where Gartner said in a recent report that by 2025 there will be 100 billion connected IoT devices. And not just the industrial, it's your Amazon Echo, it's all your Fitbit, it's all of those devices. And they're being used extensively in our private lives, in our homes, in smart cities, at border crossings, and in manufacturing. So I'm going to go back and look at the 4 stages of the technology adoption for the industrial Internet of Things. And the first stage is technology emergence. Okay, we're well past that. It's already out there, it's being used. Where we're at now is at the innovation and scaling phase of the adoption. So it's being used in manufacturing, it's being used in industrial settings. And we're just getting to the cusp of the 3rd stage, which is organizational and social transformation. So think about when electricity was introduced into production. We were making things since the day the cavemen were here. But when electricity came into production, it revolutionized manufacturing. It allowed great new processes to be used. It allowed products that use electricity to be made. And so if you think of electricity to the electronics industry, to computing, to the internet, and now to the Internet of Things. So we're on the cusp of getting to that point where the industrial Internet of Things is going to really be transformative for the society and for the way organizations are run. And you mentioned a little bit that already at GE. And then the last phase is when this technology will be self-sustaining innovation. So those are just to put in perspective where we are in sort of the the adoption scale for the Internet of Things. So now let's go to manufacturers. Why would they use these devices? And I'm going to put some great innovators and industry leaders like GE, not in this bucket, but many of your suppliers, I imagine, have installed legacy machines that have been in place and still work great, but they don't have the latest technology. They don't have the ability to get data on, do I need maintenance? Am I still producing this to spec? Boy, do I need an oil change. And so the Internet of Things devices that are being used on a factory floor allow some of this legacy equipment to be used in a much more digital and connected way. So manufacturers really looking into this as a way to become more productive, to better manage the assets they have, and to do more with less. So when manufacturers are looking at the Internet of Things, the small and medium-sized companies, they're going to take a little convincing. We talked about the cloud being more secure. I've had some of our members say, unless I can touch that computer, I don't believe it's safe. And I said, yeah, but how many other people are touching your computer that you don't even know about? When on the cyber side, one of the things that we always hear is, it's not that you haven't been hacked, it's you just don't know you've been hacked. So for small and medium-sized manufacturers, we really need to be making the business case to them that the adoption of this technology is going to really go to their bottom line. But to the security, are the devices secure? Are you sure the provenance of where that device came from? The data that it's collecting, how do you secure that data? And do you need to secure all of it? And to what level? These are business decisions that the companies need to be able to make. One of the other challenges with manufacturing equipment is they're meant to be productive. They were never designed to be secure. So when you've got, especially some of the older systems, then you're putting another device on it that again was meant to be productive and not to be secure. Are you just adding another attack vector for somebody that wants to come in and do bad things? So manufacturers need to keep all of this, or take all this into consideration when making the determination of what to use, what to connect, and what is going to help them be more productive. When we look at this country versus other countries and investments in this type of technology, China's got Made in China 2025 and their Internet Plus strategy, which has already invested $200 billion in networks. EU's got Horizon 2020 and Germany Industry 4.0. All these investments are being made into enabling technologies and the industrial Internet of Things. So when you look at the US, we don't really have a cohesive government strategy around the industrial Internet. Maybe that's okay. That's something I'm sure we're going to talk about a little bit. But when you just look at the devices that are being used today, Department of Health and Human Services protects personal health stored on connected medical devices. The Federal Reserve has published security guidance that covers devices linked to the financial industry. NHTSA recently came out with guidelines for connected cars. And the FTC is involved in all parts of the personal IoT devices. But to Alex's point, what makes sense in health might not make sense in industry. There is not a one-size-fits-all. So from where we sit, as far as policy recommendations and thoughts, we just like to go with maybe some guiding principles. So we want to promote the growth of the industrial Internet and the data infrastructure. We want to encourage voluntary and open IoT standards, to take really a multi-stakeholder approach to the policy, encourage a collaborative approach to IoT security, because again, the people making the device are making it to do a job. They're not making it to be secure, so we all have to be thinking when we take these devices how we can make them secure. We'd like to encourage responsible design practices for IoT services, because remember, the device itself is the thing. The data it collects and the analytics that go with that are really where you get the power of the device. And really encourage security by design and privacy by design at levels that are appropriate for the data you're collecting. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rebecca. That's great. Andy, great to give us a sense of the thinking on Capitol Hill around these topics. Thank you.
Yeah, so I it's really interesting. I'm going to talk a little bit about at a very high level, sort of the priorities of Congressman Reed and the Manufacturing Caucus, and you'll see within these a lot of these themes, and they're there, and we're constantly working on how to figure out what the policies are concerning them. But there's 6 areas that I wanted to highlight, and the first is that the congressman was the lead sponsor on the Revitalize American Manufacturing and Innovation Act, RAMI Act. So it's very important to him to sustain and build upon this law. Currently, there's the 14 manufacturing innovation institutes. One of them specifically is dedicated to the digital manufacturing and design innovation, which addresses a lot of these topics, but all of them have concerns in these areas and are working in these areas. Secondly, it's the policy to really look at facilitating more of these public-private partnerships. I think that's something that we really want to encourage between academic institutions, businesses, entrepreneurs, and government agencies to address manufacturing issues. Things like productivity enhancements through advanced manufacturing technologies and workforce development through apprenticeship programs and leveraging the manufacturing extension partnership programs. 3, to promote investments in R&D, both at the federal as well as corporate levels, especially in areas of technology targeting low-cost and energy-efficient processes, as well as working in Congress to change the tax code so that it promotes more R&D efforts by American manufacturers. And American manufacturers do spend the most of their money in the most of the R&D that's spent in the private sector is spent by manufacturers in this country. And then as well to continue and foster the support to our universities and research institutions. 4th, reforming the complex and broken tax code that we currently have. That's a big topic these days. And as tax reform goes forward, we want to make sure that we enact laws and tax policy that helps American manufacturers. An example is the immediate expensing of new equipment. And 5, we want to ensure that government regulations do not hurt American businesses. So one of the important areas that is being pushed is to have more transparency and that oversight in the regulatory process, so that we can ensure that businesses know what the regulations' actual direct and indirect costs are. And then finally, 6, to prioritize American interests in trade agreements. When brokering trade agreements, our negotiators need to look at enforcing current trade laws and allowing our manufacturers the opportunity to compete around the world on a level playing field. So those are the 6 broad areas that the congressman is pushing in this legislative session. But I wanted to sort of talk about 3 examples that kind of relate to how the U.S. Is getting ready for the Industrial Revolution and what we have to do. And you've heard a number of things here. But one of the things that we need to do is, I think that was Alex's last item, the workforce development. We've got both existing workers and workers in the pipeline, students are. And it's my belief that this is going to require a total revamping of our education system, pre-K through college. Since that system was really put in place for the technologies and the work environment of the last century, not this century. So, but, that being said, we also have to look forward to training older workers, and that needs a major relook as well. I mean, today there are on the order of 50 million workers that have no post-secondary credential, and these folks are going to need new skills to remain productive in the workforce and our factories going forward. Another area that I think Rebecca touched on too is small and medium enterprises and their readiness to incorporate these technologies. Of about 250,000 manufacturing firms in the U.S., the small and medium enterprises, which are those that are typically classified as having less than 500 employees, there's about 240,000 out of the 250,000 that fall in that category, so 95%. And of that 95%, 3/4 of them have employees less than 20 employees. So having worked for a large OEM aerospace company for 30 years and having spent a good amount of time working with our supply chain, I can tell you that the efficiency and the productivity of the whole chain is only as good as its weakest link. And so, in general, smaller companies are not as productive. And as Rebecca said, I mean, they're hesitant to adopt these technologies. Larger companies, have the resources to go in. A smaller company, if they devote a person to learning about technology or getting up to speed, that's a person that's not on the line producing the product. So there's issues there that have to be looked at. But because they represent such a large percentage of the number of firms, if we can increase the productivity and the efficiency of smaller companies that make up a large bulk of the supply chain, that's where the low-hanging fruit is. So I think we've got to look at doing that. And again, introduction of these industrial internet technologies can really help us harvest that low-hanging fruit. Finally, updating the trade deals. This was talked about too. The free cross-border data flows and the export of digital products. I mean, the digital economy is growing rapidly, but it's bigger outside of the United States and growing faster outside of the United States. So, our trade deals, have to allow free cross-border data flows, as well as other things like prohibiting, having deals or having provisions that, prohibit companies from forcing prohibiting countries from forcing companies to have local servers as a way of accessing business in that country. Boeing, my company, has GE engines, but what GE does with its engines, we do with our airplanes, in terms of the data that's collected on each flight. So to provide real-time service to that airplane, but also I come from more on the manufacturing and design aspects of the company. So I look at that data as, let's get that data and tell us how to make the product better. What new upgrades we can add, how we make the next product even better using that large amounts of data. So I think being able to collect that data. Airplanes fly across borders all the time, so any barriers that are put up would restrict that from happening. And these are just things that we can think of. As little as 10 years ago, as Alex said, I mean, we would not even have believed where we are now. So in 10 years or 20 years from now, there'll be digital products and services that we can't even imagine now. But and the wealth that will create, I think, is something that we all want to strive for. But when we put up barriers thinking that we're doing good, we limit the potential of that and slow that down. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Andy. It's good to see that Congress remains attentive to these policy issues.
Andy, I was just kind of wondering, based on your remarks, how many of the younger people in the audience Googled George Jetson? Just so I could say, what in the heck is that guy from GE talking about?
Well, and it's funny because I use the Jetsons a lot when I give talks because it was set where George Jetson worked in a manufacturing facility, and you never actually saw anything being made. So to your digital, I mean, that maybe they, in the writer's mind, they got to the point where they didn't need the factory.
Yeah, no, that's probably right.
Let me ask you if any of the panelists would like to react to something said by their fellow co-panelist.
So I just second the notion that the exciting thing about the data that machines generate is what it can teach. And I think we're just now starting to scratch the surface in terms of its potential. And so I look at it and I say that customers can improve their operations unbelievably well. So we're big in the oil and gas industry. And we just formed a new partnership, and we have a new company, Baker Hughes, a GE company. As they say, they take it from megawatt to molecule, or from molecule to megawatt. And I look at the oil and gas industry, no secret that it's under distress. And yet the innovations there in terms of helping our customers address the inherent inefficiencies in oil field exploration and production are enormous, and are helping those companies overcome the distress that their industry is experiencing. That's what partnership with the customer is about. So that's incredible, and helping them make their operations more efficient are great. But our engineers and our designers can't get their hands on this data soon enough. They want to see how our engines are performing, how our turbines are performing, how our wind turbines are performing. What can we do in the next generation of products when we see how our engines are performing in different environments? And that's where, Steve, the idea of digital twins is so exciting, because you can sit at your desktop and have access to worldwide data in different conditions and use that information to improve the next generation of the product. So the potential here is breathtaking. And that's why it's so important, getting back to policy, for policymakers to stay out of the way where that's what makes sense, and to get involved in the right ways where that makes sense.
Facilitative interventions.
Yes.
I should tell the audience that I actually met Rebecca when we were on a tour of Austria, courtesy of the Austrian Marshall Fund, a tour of the science and innovation economy of Austria. But Rebecca and I are sitting in a brake pad manufacturer in Linz, Austria, touring the floor, and they're the tier 1 brake pad supplier for BMW and Mercedes. But they were telling us that, essentially, what BMW wants is real-time visibility into the status of every single piece of manufacturing equipment that is making any part or component going into a BMW among the 60,000 suppliers they have. So they said, BMW doesn't want to call from us when our machine's down, so we're going to miss the brake pad delivery, and it's going to delay their production. They want to see it in real time. And in fact, there's a combat information center, so to speak, somewhere in Munich that is monitoring the status of all these machines in real time, which I think speaks to the power of the potential of the industrial internet for efficiency and productivity. But what was interesting was they said this is why Austria as a country had put in place an Industry 4.0 strategy, particularly to assist the SMEs with the adoption of these types of digital technologies. And if you look at page 23 of our report at the back, the smart manufacturing one, we document strategies like this in Sweden, the smart industry strategy. In Europe, the factories of the future strategy for the EU. And when you look at U.S. innovation policy, it has historically had strengths and weaknesses. Certainly one of the strengths has been its diffuse nature, its bottom-up nature, but sometimes its weakness can be the lack of coordination. Are we doing enough? Are we investing enough in Industry 4.0 and in the industrial internet? Do we need a more coherent U.S. industrial internet strategy?
So I'll start. I've worked in manufacturing and in the Washington environment for most of my career, and Industrial policy is something that's discussed every time there's a new administration, either for good or for bad, that we need one, or, oh my God, we certainly don't want to have one. So I think it's probably unrealistic to hope that we're going to have a coherent policy around this. I personally would say there's not enough money being invested from a federal level. We do have the institutes and various programs in the agencies. I'd like to see more. And it's not just for the advancing of the technology, but also to get the workforce up to speed, to help the small and medium-sized manufacturers that are either don't know about it or too afraid to adopt it. I think your example of the brake pad supplier, and Alex, to yours, the supply chain. We're hearing from some of our small companies that GE wants to know where their parts are, real time, as they're being made on my factory floor. And I don't know how to give that to them. But if I want my contract renewed, I'm going to have to figure it out. So I think that yes, there's always could be more money in investment of the technologies, but the policy should really be supporting the environment and infrastructure that will allow it to flourish on the private side, and whether that's on the education and workforce or helping the small and medium-sized manufacturers with the adoption. I think that might be a sweet spot where it's not industrial policy, but it supports the technology that's going to benefit all of us.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And, actually, a couple weeks ago, I was up in the Congressman's district. I'd never been to that part of New York. And there are a lot of these small and medium companies there that form the bedrock of a lot of the communities in the district and, frankly, in many congressional districts across the country. And this is a need, I think. We spend a lot of money on the technology and a small fraction of that on the workforce development and training and being able to disseminate these technologies to the small and medium enterprises. Again, I think, as I talked about, I think that is low-hanging fruit, because if you can increase the productivity of those folks, it increases the productivity of the OEM supply chains, and has a compounding effect on productivity growth in general. So I definitely agree that is a sweet spot that we are looking at.
I think there's definitely room for the government of the United States to step up and articulate a series of principles that the United States believes ought to govern a cooperative industrial internet. I think that in the absence of leadership by our government in the United States, other governments will step into the vacuum and start asserting themselves in ways that aren't necessarily going to be for the benefits of the international economy. So I don't think it's any secret, and I hope I don't give any offense to anyone when I say that there are other countries in the world that champion their flagship companies a lot more than the United States champions companies like GE. And that can be a huge competitive disadvantage for us. And if the government of the United States stands by and allows Germany and China and Brazil, which has ambitions to set a framework for the industrial internet, to occupy the space, and steps by let that happen, there are going to be developments and there are going to be default ground rules that are established that we don't believe are necessarily going to be optimal. I think the rest of the world looks at this and says, we see an opportunity here to really leave our mark on the industrial internet, and I don't know why the United States wouldn't step up at the same time and say, we want to make sure that we have free flow of data and everything else that we believe is required for our businesses to succeed as much as businesses around the world, and make it a level playing field. And I think it's important to get in now. And I'll say that the great news from our perspective is that the administration is very focused on this and interested in this and making sure that we do the right things. And representatives and Congress on both sides of the aisle are also very, very intrigued by this and want to make sure that we're doing the right thing. And I'm encouraged that they want to just do the right thing, not just something, and so I think there's some education to be done as we learn about all this, but there's clearly a role for the United States to play here, and we do need to articulate an industrial internet strategy.
That's fantastic. Alex, there was a wonderful article in this month's Harvard Business Review, written by your former CEO at GE, Jeff Immelt, but the article was called "How I Remade GE," and it talked about the process that you went through of industrial transformation to move into the digital era. You mentioned opening the office in San Ramon. You've, I think, as a company, shown wonderful leadership in helping America rethink what is the manufacturing job in the digital environment with your commercials. If y'all have seen those about the kid who comes home to his wife's parents and says, I'm working at GE, and he says, can you lift a hammer? And he said, no, I'm coding for the locomotive. But maybe could you just talk a little bit about that process of how you've transformed, what lessons you've learned that might be useful for others, and how your new CEO, Jim Flannery, is
John Flannery.
Is engaging this opportunity.
So John Flannery is all in on the industrial internet, just like Jeff Immelt was, and I think that, again, it's something that we're all excited about GE. And I think that, we look at this as really, two or three things. It's a bet on our future. We think that it's inevitable. We think that it's something we need to do, but it's also very, very different than what we had done before. And so it's really rethinking how we work, how we interact, and what our value proposition is to our customers. And so the difference between making great machines and making great machines that also think is night and day. And so it's a whole new skill set that required us to bring in a whole new set of talent, mesh a culture, a software culture, and a Silicon Valley culture with a traditional manufacturing culture at GE. And we've had our rough moments along the way. There have been some bumps in the road. But I'd say we've done it because everybody has a shared vision and they're very excited about it. But it really took a leap of faith, that this is the right thing to do. And I think 3-4 years into it, we couldn't be more excited. But the other challenge is that we have to get our own act together in terms of having what we call a digital thread. And I really think that for us to expect customers to entrust us with their data and give them guidance on what their data is telling us about their machines, they want to see that we're able to do this for ourselves and really establish GE as a showcase and show that we can restructure our own operations using a digital thread to be a proving ground, more or less, for what we're asking our customers to buy into with us. And so I think, those two focused areas are really how I think Jeff has had a big, huge culture shift. And again, I think it's exciting. Old dogs like me are learning new tricks, and we're also becoming a real magnet, I think, for people who see GE being a different type of company. They see Owen in those commercials and they say, that's a place that I might want to try out because it seems like it's a more contemporary company that's trying to continually refresh itself, and we're really proud of that.
Fantastic. In each of your presentations, we spoke about skills and workforce development. I think this is a challenge for all economies and countries as we shift into this digital era. ITIP wrote in our book, Innovation Economics, that this has been a particular challenge for the U.S. Our research shows that U.S. corporations' investments in workforce training have declined by 30% over the past decade, in part because as we have an increasingly mobile economy, the investments firms sometimes make in their employees are more fungible, more mobile. They can't capture all the benefits of it, and that might be part of the reason for the decline. The question I want to ask is, what are the responsibilities of the public and private sectors with regard to skills development? What should we expect of companies, and what should we expect of universities and then of the government in providing a more supportive ecosystem to ensure that, to your point, that we're both retraining the existing workforce with the skills they need to remain competitive, but also bringing the new talent into the economy that's going to be able to compete globally?
Well, I think that I think it gets back to these public-private partnerships. I think, that's going to be key. Up in our district, there is a program that the local community college, Corning Glass, and some of the other companies in the area, as well as the high school districts, have gotten together and created a program where they will have identified what the needs of the local industry is, and then create curriculum starting at the high school level through a 2-year community college degree that's provided free of charge. So students graduate and they're ready to go to work in a local company, no debt, and addressing the needs of the local company. So I think those are the kinds of examples of this public-private partnership that, I think we've got to figure out, again, from a policy point of view, but also from a company, an industry point of view, how do you scale that, right? Because I think that's where, we're going to get the advantages that we need, is how we scale those kinds of things. So I think, that is where I see, the roles is not that, I think traditionally we, both private and public entities, sort of took onto themselves what had been traditionally their roles. I think we've got to change all that. We've got to look at how we get more cooperation and partnership going forward.
So I want to share a story from one of my members. It's a California aerospace parts manufacturer. And the owners decided to make an investment in becoming more digital. It's a pretty big parts made in traditional ways. And so, we're talking with them and giving them some suggestions. We're getting a tour of the factory, and there's this big whiteboard with all these scribbles on it. And I said, "What's that?" "Oh, well, that's how Joe over here keeps status of his line." I said, "But do you know what it means?" "Nope, only Joe does." So as they tried to get this process going within the company, guess what? Joe didn't want to have anything to do with it, because only he knew what was going on his line, and he didn't want anybody else to have visibility. So we talk about the current workforce. Maybe it's not a technology investment, but just having them understand that, this will make your job easier. It's not going to replace you. It's actually going to enable you to do your job better. So I think the current workforce, especially some of the folks that have been in their careers for decades, really need to be brought along in this journey and not just have it said, okay, you're going to use this today and moving forward. So really a collaboration within even a company as this transformation takes place, as I'm sure in GE you had to do a lot of that. The other connection I think we need to make is in the investments that we're already making in technology development, whether it be in a private company or at a university or at one of these manufacturing centers, really make the connection back to the educators. And when I say educators, I don't just mean the college folks, because we hear stories of engineers being graduated that have never been in a factory. It also goes to the community in the technical colleges. And we are actually working with the Lightweight Metals Institute in Detroit, bringing together educators and industry to say, okay, as you're developing these great new lightweight metals, what should you be teaching in the schools to be able to get the folks graduated so that when this technology is made available, somebody knows what to do with it? So really making the connection between the innovators and the investments in R&D to the educators, I think is a key, and that's something that perhaps the government can become more active in promoting.
So, the way I'd come at it is I think companies owe their employees the duty to harness all the technology that's available to make a company as efficient and as exciting as possible. And I think that when our teams see our new technologies and they see what's made possible when you harness the power of the industrial internet, they get excited about the future. On my team, I work with the corporate audit staff, and we have introduced some robots within GE that are now helping us with ledger entries. And on one hand, you'd think, oh, maybe people feel threatened that if the robot doing this, they're not going to have a job anymore. They were so excited when they saw this, and they came up with, I want to say 15 or 16 different applications where they thought robots could also do it, because they want to work on more interesting and challenging stuff. And let the machines take care of the drudgery and let them work on the stuff that they can do better than machines. And there's an excitement that's palpable when you see technology implemented the right way. And so I think we owe it to our employees, who are the best employees in the world, to stay contemporary and stay abreast of current technologies. We also owe a duty of transparency, and I think we have to be transparent about what the requirements are for the workforce of the future. This isn't a new issue. My brother-in-law was doing research for his company, and he came across an article from an Albuquerque newspaper in 1936, where the then CEO of General Electric made a presentation in Albuquerque, not sure why he was there, back in 1936, which was about the threats posed by technology to the workforce and what it means to people who feel like they're going to lose their job because of technological advances. I mean, it's back in 1936. So this is something that's been talked about for years, and right now we're just talking about the contemporary version of it. And so we need to be transparent with our schools, with our colleges, with our universities, with our high schools, with our trade schools, with our community colleges about the skill sets that are going to be required in the future. And I'll do a shout out to my old boss, Mitch Daniels, who's now the chancellor at Purdue, who has fostered a program where Purdue has now graduated additive engineers who are ready to conquer the world, because they are way ahead of any other school in terms of using powdered metals and 3D printing in ways that were unimaginable several years ago. And they are just turning out these incredibly exciting young women and men who specialize in this area. That's the pattern for the future. And again, I think that's based on transparency by companies like GE and our suppliers about what we're going to need 5-10 years from now. And I think that transparency is the best policy.
That's fantastic. Let me just add, for a presentation we put together last week for the North American Council of Advanced Manufacturing, we put together a list of innovative skills programs that we've seen across the U.S. economy, which I'm happy to share if that's of interest. I'd also like to call your attention to the Manufacturing Skills Act, 1542, introduced recently by Senator Coons and IIoT. This is bipartisan legislation that would create an annual $100 million competition to promote reforms in workforce education and skills training for manufacturing in states and metropolitan areas. So I think there's some good legislation to address this challenge. Let me ask one more question before I open it up to the audience. So please be getting your questions ready. I'll turn to you in just one second. Thanks for your patience. But, you know, we have traditionally put global trade into buckets: trade in goods, trade in services, trade in data flows. But when you, again, hear the GE aviation engine stories, as I understand it, GE no longer goes to an airline and sells a jet engine. Rather, they sell guaranteed uptime or guaranteed thrust. And so the airline consumes the engine now as a service. So essentially what we have is products or devices being consumed as services in the global economy. And the business models are really blowing up the distinction between trade in goods and trade in services. So as the U.S. moves forward to either negotiate NAFTA again or look at new trade deals, how do we need to be thinking about trade policy differently to support the industrial internet?
Well, I'll quickly just throw some things out. I think that when, as I alluded to, these markets are growing. They're larger now outside of the United States, growing faster outside the United States. So, the trade policy has got to be addressed. And I would say that, we're traditionally taking the approach of trade in goods, trade in services, as opposed to digital products, right? And so, digital products are evolving at such a rapid rate. Traditional approaches to trade agreements are really very static, right? I mean, you can see NAFTA, for example, in the 90s, and here we're just now, renegotiating it, or if you think TPP renegotiated just the last few years. So it was 20 years before we did it, and it was static. So when we go forward, somehow we've got to figure out how we put provisions in there that let it be adaptable to the rapidly evolving digital products that are going to come. Because, like I said, we don't even know what the products are going to be like in 10 years, because the products we have today we didn't know about 10 years ago. So I think that is a key thing. And so the more barriers we erect to the free flow of data, we're going to be squelching that. And we should do. This is one of the things that is similar to people saying, well, let's be careful of how rapidly we introduce automation into factories and things like that, because there's going to be issues with people losing their jobs. Productivity is one of the main drivers of economic growth. and we should have our foot on the pedal all the way. And yeah, there's going to be disruptions, and we need to figure that out from a policy and societal point of view, how we help mitigate those populations that are impacted. But if we take our foot off of the productivity pedal, our economic growth is going to suffer, and then the whole country will suffer. And our competitors around the globe are not taking their foot off the pedal. And so I think, we need to encourage and have provisions in our agreements in trade that really open up and don't put barriers in place.
That's great. Alex,
I think Andy nailed it. I mean, I think the key is that information has to flow as freely as products. And again, we see early warning signs that definitions of national security that don't necessarily square with ours, and concepts of privacy that are grounded in consumer issues that don't really carry over legitimately to the industrial internet are in fact being transposed over to the industrial internet. And so we just have to be very cautious about erecting artificial barriers at borders that stop data from flowing freely in and out in ways that defeat the sales of goods that you make in and out of those countries as well.
By the way, ITIF's report, Are Robots Taking Our Jobs or Making Them?, looks at the U.S. economy in decadal period since 1950. And what we show is that in every single decade in which productivity was higher, unemployment was lower, and vice versa. The decades of lowest productivity growth had the highest rates of unemployment. So if we want greater levels of high value added employment, greater levels of productivity, they are not in contradistinction. I hope this has been a stimulating panel. I got some questions I see already. If you would just say your name and the organization you're with, we can start there in the back, sir.
Hi, Robert Hollyman with Kroll & Mooring. I want to thank you for the panel, and it was a great discussion. And Alex, having seen your company at a couple events with senior Chinese officials in the last year and a half, including last year JCCT, I'll say they paid a lot of attention to what the opportunity is, and I think they see this as an opportunity to increase their efficiency. But one of my questions is really, how are other governments that you see leading on these issues, and are there other governments like Singapore or elsewhere? I'm just back from the APEC meetings in Vietnam, and the consistent theme throughout those meetings from the countries started with phrases, now that the U.S. has left Asia, what do we do? And I certainly want the U.S. to be in the game, but do you see other progressive governments like Singapore or other markets where you have big businesses, do you see any of those folks wanting to carry the mantle on these issues like free flow of data? Japan, other countries, what's your experience been to date, or for anyone on the panel?
The answer is absolutely. We see governments in other countries wanting to step up and distinguish themselves as the champions of the industrial internet. There is no question that there are some countries after the collapse of the TPP who see an opportunity to step up and try to promote some of the principles of free flow of data that were in the TPP in ways that we think it's an unfortunate collateral consequence of the collapse of TPP. Germany is very interested in establishing itself as the new thought center for the industrial internet. China is interested in establishing itself as a new thought center for the industrial internet. And again, we're an international company. We welcome the interest in this. We welcome the desire to promote the efficient use of the industrial internet. We think it's terrific. We just think there's a role for the United States to play as well. And if the United States doesn't step up and assert its thought leadership in ways that will keep the free flow of information going around the world, other companies are going to displace the leadership of the United States in this area. And again, like I tried to say, and it's a hard thing to articulate, but we're seeing warning signs of companies trying to restrict data and requiring it to be domiciled geographically within their country, which is defeating in a lot of ways of scale. And so I think there's a lot of countries out there who see a first mover advantage. To what end? So far, we're not entirely sure. but there's clearly an opportunity to try to get out ahead of the United States on this.
I'll take them in the order I saw them. There, sir.
Hi, Bob Stoll, Drinker Biddle. My question is going to be related to standards. I understand that GE is very much involved in standard setting, and a lot of the setting organizations have the requirement that you designate your intellectual property and then you agree to license at fair, reasonable, and non-discriminatory rates. But I'm also hearing now that standard setting in some of the foreign countries are involving the governments, and that they are requiring licensing of way beyond the intellectual property that's required for setting the standard. My question is GE seeing this, and what are you doing about it, if you are?
So we are seeing aggressive behavior by certain governments with respect to prerequisite intellectual property requirements, and we're negotiating it and we're addressing it. And for the most part, we're able to address it constructively, and we try to do so. And we're smart about how we use our intellectual property, and if we believe that somebody is demanding too much as a prerequisite, we don't engage. And I think we're fortunate to be able to be in a position where we don't have to do every piece of business that's available out there, and we don't have to compete in every market that's out there. But again, I think this is where having a set of international principles that the United States and like-minded companies could pursue to their credit is something that I think would be very beneficial to make sure that everybody can play according to the same rules.
Hi, my name is Carmine DeLuisio, Transnational Strategy Group. I have a question a little bit about workforce development in our trade agencies and also our regulators. So we have an international problem. We have a real potential other governments becoming more aggressive and setting standards around the world. So what are we doing as business, as government, to help our trade agencies, not only USTR, state, commerce, our embassies overseas, to become more familiar with the digital economy, to understand it, and then our regulators to get them involved in acting vis-a-vis their more aggressive regulators internationally? What are we doing, and can we do at a very practical level in this area?
I'll take the first shot if that's okay. I mean, so I can, so the good news, I mean, please don't take what I'm saying as, am I urging the United States to assert a leadership role? I'm very comforted that the right people in the United States and the government and elsewhere get it, and they're doing the homework, and they're preparing to take a more assertive leadership role. And I've seen that this week. I mean, I've had meetings with administration officials, I've had meetings with members of Congress on both sides, and they're all in. They get this, they want to do it, they want to understand it, and they're like a sponge ready to soak up information. And so we have a customer conference every year for Minds and Machines. And one of the things we're doing this year is we have invited the Commerce Department to send their digital officers to our conference so that they can start seeing our perspective on some of these industrial internet issues. And again, we've got really good uptake, and I think that it's going to be a collaborative exercise between GE and like-minded companies that have a lot to offer. GE's certainly not the only one, but being a resource for USTR personnel and everywhere to get steeped in these issues. It's not easy stuff. We're still learning by the month, and I really credit the people who I've met this week, the officials I've met with, wanting to do this the right way and being ready to invest the time and effort that's necessary to do it. So I'm not hitting the panic button. I'm just saying that we need to get to work here in the United States together with the rest of the world to do this the right way. But I see every sign that everybody's prepared to invest in this and take advantage of every opportunity they can to get this right.
And I'll just add to that I think it's great that large companies like GE, that can invite the government folks in. On the flip side, for the small and medium-sized companies, we encourage them to talk to their elected officials and say, this is important to me and I need your help, whether it's the workforce or adoption of new technologies. So we really encourage them to, your voice matters, your jobs matter to your elected officials. Let them know that they should be doing more and should be taking a leadership position on this, and really being a world leader in the industrial internet.
Yeah, I think Alex hit on it right. I mean, those in Congress, we're sponges. We're absorbing this. I think that everyone understands how important it is in just getting the information and really processing. How do you do it right? It's like we don't want to go in there and muck things up by doing things too fast. So I think we're absorbing. And, I went to the district. People from the district come into the offices and meet with us, but we also go out to them and get, what are their issues and what are they most concerned about. So I think, bigger companies can send people. They've got their delegations here in Washington that come and talk to us all the time. But for those smaller companies that we deal with, if we don't hear from them, we actually go to them too. So.
And just on that point, the Manufacturing Extension Partnership, MEP, is really one of the most effective programs in the entire federal government. Every dollar of investment returns about $1,580 in client sales, about 60,000 to 80,000 jobs created or retained per year. To us, it's certainly important that we maintain this program. I know it was zeroed out in the initial budget. That does not seem to be consonant with the strategy of making sure we have robust support for American manufacturing. So I hope there'll be bipartisan support on the Hill and the administration going forward that the MEP is really vital. We need to invest more. Canada invests 10 times more, and Japan 20 times more as a share of GDP in their manufacturing extension programs than we do. So let's focus on that too. Go ahead, sir. Actually, you here, and then you, sir.
My name is Anupam Khanna. I'm on the board of Indigo, which is India's largest airline. And I came to learn about how this could be. Unfortunately, we don't have, or I won't use the word, neither Boeing planes nor GE. All our planes are Airbus and Pratt & Whitney.
You're not allowed to ask a question.
Yeah, next.
But my question is actually related to my previous job, which was as head of India's IT industry policy at the IT industry. The question of relieving it to the private sector for standards. I've actually been involved in drawing up an agenda, the government of India. It becomes a little difficult, and I'm wondering whether it's even doable in the US, given the controversy that it's still continuing with standard essential patents in the IT industry. And having one, it's related to some extent, the same philosophy is whether it serves the larger public interest. There's a history in the IT industry. In the beginning, all computer standards were essentially driven by IBM. But then when the revolution occurred, it has evolved. I won't go into all that. So that's one. That's where the rubber is hitting the road. And I'm wondering whether this can survive, especially in a global world, where you don't have to just worry about the India and let's say the US and the China. A country like India will say, what happens if Google, Android, and Huawei, between the two of them, come up with something which basically could be devastating, let's say, for the Indian economy, for the rest of the world. So I'm saying there has to be some, whether it's a light touch or not, I don't think the governments can get away from having a orchestrating role in the development of standards in this area especially. Secondly, the rubber hits the road on cybersecurity and data flows, cross-border data flows. That whole dimension has not, people take one or the other. And I think when I was talking to firms, it's really where the intersection is, besides the privacy dimension, where again, some sort of, whether you say public interest, has to be there in orchestrating it. So I'm not quite sure how you can leave it without an active role and a framework for policy at the government level.
So I would agree that there definitely is a role for government, if for nothing else than the convening of getting together all of the parties that have an interest in this, whether it's on the cybersecurity or the standards. And so I think that the government needs to be involved as far as saying, we recognize that this is going to be a collaborative effort, that it's going to take multi-stakeholder involvement. Just don't let them drive it to a particular solution before everybody gets together, and especially on the cyber side of things. When you're talking industrial internet, it is a huge issue, both with the connected production floor, the data flows up and down supply chains. again, I don't really think that the government needs to play a role in that. I can say, for example, that the DoD put out some cybersecurity regulations for acquisition that start at the OEM and go down the entire supply chain. They put these out a few years ago, and industry said, okay, well, I have a question. Who in the DoD can I ask? And the answer is, I don't know. So they put out this regulation that did really nothing to secure the supply chain, and they're now getting around several years later to actually getting somebody responsible for it and working with industry to make sure that it has its desired intent. Quite honestly, in that case, the rule came out and a lot of the companies just said, all right, I'm out of defense business because I can't meet that requirement that's written into my contract from Boeing or General Dynamics or whoever it happens to be. So I think that they need to play a role, they need to be a convener, but not a dictator of the rules.
I think that's just so important when you look at where we are in this stage of the industry, because governments, God bless them, but they have a way of forcing people to pick winners and losers, and they choose sides at an early, if they come in too soon. So there are a lot of competing views within the industry on the right way for standards to be developed. And forcing a government to make a decision now on 3 years or 2 years of data on limited experience really threatens to thwart the innovation that's necessary for industry to get to the right place. And again, this is where the dangers of one country getting out ahead of other countries and establishing a standard in a way that may benefit companies within that country but disadvantage competitors in other countries is a dangerous proposition. And that's why having this push and pull and the tug that different companies have about ensuring that standards are interoperable and international and are fair to everybody, sometimes compromise is the right way to do it. But we're learning so much every single day about how the industrial internet works, and having industry-led innovation here, it's just so important for governments to let that happen. Of course they have a role, and they have a role in making sure that that process is a fair, open, honest, and legitimate one, but it really ought to be driven by the industries, at least until it becomes more mature, and I think that that's really the critical point. And on cybersecurity, all I would say is I don't think there are many companies out there that are different than GE where we take this seriously as a matter of commitments to our customers and to ourselves. I mean, there are bad people who try to ping our system multiple times each second to try to infiltrate GE systems. We take those threats incredibly seriously. The only thing we take more seriously are threats to the equipment we sell customers, because we owe them safety to the fullest extent we're possible to do it. And we don't really need a government standard to tell us that. That's just a matter of doing right by our customers. And I'm sure all our competitors are the same there.
I'll just add to the previous point in terms of, we're early in the stage here, and for government to get involved, I totally agree, is not the right point. Let alone, in my own just starting to look at the data, one, is it the right data? Do we have enough of the data to even start informing policy directions? That is a concern, is, do we even know what kind of data to collect to inform policy and how much of it and that kind of thing? I mean, we're in the early stages. So to start, pushing things from a government perspective at this early stage is not the right approach.
I think I see two more hands. Let's take those two questions at once, and that'll be the final word. So for the two of you, here and then there. And just ask it together.
Thank you. Jeremy, with the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. So just wanted to see, first of all, how many government agency representatives are there here in the room? Okay, cool, quite a few, because we've been talking about government getting involved. And so I'm here to see actually how we can get involved as a representative of the Energy Regulatory Commission. You were talking about oil and gas, molecule to megawatt. I think it's an exciting conversation to have. You were talking about Commerce sending its representatives over to the GE Minds and Machines conference. But at the same time, I'm seeing a little bit of pushback insofar as now may not be the right time to get involved, or at least get too busy around this. So how does someone like me communicate a message around what's happening in this sort of Industry 4.0 back to my agency, and at what point do we recognize the trigger to get involved, and how can we start to prepare for that? What are some other examples of how other agencies have been getting involved that you might be able to point me to, that I might be able to look at as a precedent? Thank you.
Okay, go ahead and ask yours, and we'll take the two questions at once.
My name is Sudarshan Rachuri from Advanced Manufacturing Office, Department of Energy. I've been at NIST for 20 years before that. So there is a lot of discussion about standards. There are two things, I think. One is sometimes standards drive technology and sometimes technology drives standards. And you have seen standard wars and the economics of standards and the role of the government. I think we can spend the entire day discussing that. But the question to me is, I have been the chair of many international standard committees, including ISO IEC chair, and they are defining many of these terms and definitions of IoT and IoT. And we as a government role, when do we join that? We started that committees mainly because some of the definitions are going to be detrimental to US industry. And the way that they are defining even a simple symbol on a GD&T, geometric and diminishing and tolerancing, is going to change. So I think this is always this problem that industry thinking that the government is there to create problems for them. It's actually government is helping you. That is our job. Our job is to help industries to grow and be competitive in the market and they're globally competitive. So I think this notion of the government coming as a problem in the beginning or end, or so there is a reason that we join that to make sure that we are the neutral players. So I think a lot of papers have been written, a lot of research has been done about the notion of standards and how it actually helps in innovation. And so I hope that is the message you are giving.
No, I mean, again, we could have a whole day on standards, you're right, and standard setting and the process by which standards are set throughout the world. There's no question about that. I think all that we're trying to say is that government clearly has a role, if anything else, just to make sure that the process is working honestly, transparently, and is being based on science and technology and not commercial self-interest. So I agree that there's definitely a role. All I'm saying is that in an early stage industry like this, it ought to be driven principally by industry, with government playing more of a refereeing role than anything else. But in terms of the standards being defined, that's why I think it's so important for you and other representatives of the United States to get in the debate and get in the discussion. Because to the extent that there are regulators in other countries who are defining standards in a way that's going to spill over beyond their jurisdictions into affecting the international standards, I think we want a level playing field. And I think that the government's done a great job of making sure it's trying to do that, and I really applaud the efforts of this administration to try to level the playing field in trade. I mean, it's kind of hard to be against fair competition. You know, and then in terms of how to get involved, GE.com, GE.com/digital, and we'll have more than you ever wanted to know about the industrial internet right at your fingertips. But I would encourage you and any other representatives of the government who would like more information to reach out to us. And we will make seminars available, we'll make information available. We think it's important for everybody to really, who's interested in this and intrigued by it, to steep themselves in it. We think knowledge is power here. So when you're ready, let us know. Come on over. And we'll show you around.
And I would add, as far as the engagement across the different federal agencies, especially with energy, I would look at the trade associations that are here in town that represent your industry, because they're spending a lot of time talking about this. So you getting to know them and what they're doing and what their policy priorities are would probably be useful. And, then depending on the agency and, what industries you're covering, there's an association for everybody. So somebody there is thinking about it.
Ditto.
Well, this has been a great discussion. Let me just say that with regard to future ITIF work in this area, we are working on a new brief report that will be an update of manufacturing policy priorities for the administration, the 115th Congress. We're also working on a study of global benchmarking study of manufacturing adoption of IoT, which we'll be presenting in Taiwan in November. I also want to say that this event will be posted online if you'd like to share with any of your friends. And with that, I would like to thank you for joining us and ask you to thank our panel for their great remarks today.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thanks for having us. This is fun. Oh, that's fun.
Okay.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Great. Thank you.
Hi, how you doing?
Great presentation.
Oh, thanks, it was fun.
Oh, wonderful. Okay.